When you picture a spaceship, you probably think of something like this, or maybe this. What do they all have in common? Among other things, they're huge because they have to carry people, fuel, and all sorts of supplies, scientific instruments, and in rare cases, planet-killing lasers. But the next real-world generation of spacecraft may be much, much smaller. We're talking fit inside your pocket, tiny. Imagine sending a swarm of these micro spacecraft out into the galaxy. They could explore distant stars and planets by carrying sophisticated electronic sensors that would measure everything from temperature to cosmic rays. You could deploy thousands of them for the cost of a single space shuttle mission, exponentially increasing the amount of data we could collect about the universe. And they're individually expendable, meaning that we could send them into environments that are too risky for a billion-dollar rocket or probe. Several hundred small spacecraft are already orbiting the Earth, taking pictures of outer space and collecting data on things like the behavior of bacteria in Earth's atmosphere and magnetic signals that could help predict earthquakes. But imagine how much more we could learn if they could fly beyond Earth's orbit. That's exactly what organizations like NASA want. Send micro spacecraft to scout habitable planets and describe astronomical phenomena we can't study from Earth. But something so small can't carry a large engine or tons of fuel, so how would such a vessel propel itself? For micro spacecraft, it turns out you need micro propulsion. On really small scales, some of the familiar rules of physics don't apply. In particular, everyday Newtonian mechanics break down, and forces that are normally negligible become powerful. Those forces include surface tension and capillary action, the phenomena that govern other small things. Micro-propulsion systems can harness these forces to power spacecraft. One example of how this might work is called microfluidic electrospray propulsion. It's a type of rocket thrust, which means that it shoots out charged particles to generate momentum. One model uses jet propulsion technology. Here's how it works. That postage-stamp-sized metal plate is studded with 100 skinny needles and coated with a metal that has a low melting point, like indium. A metallic grid sits above the needles, and an electric field is set up between the grid and the plate. When the plate is heated, the indium melts, and capillary action draws the liquid metal upwards. The electric field tugs the molten metal upwards, while surface tension holds it back, causing the foam to conform. The small release of the tips of the needles makes it possible to move over the mass. And when that happens, positively charged particles shoot off at speeds of 10 kilometers per second. That speed tells the spacecraft at about is an extremely small part. The combined force of speed of them pushing and exhaust that pours this and fall, which makes it these micro-propulsion systems haven't been fully tested, but some scientists think that they will provide enough thrust to break small fragments They're predicting that thousands of spacecraft will be launched in the next 10 years to gather data that today we can only dream about. And that is micro-propulsion science.
Imagine a distant future when humans reach beyond our pale blue dot, forge cities on planets thousands of light years away, and maintain a galactic web of trade and transport. What would it take for our civilization to make that leap? There are many things to consider. How would we communicate? What might a galactic government look like? And one of the most fundamental of all, where would we get enough energy to power that civilization, its industry, its terraforming operations, and its starships? An astronomer named Nikolai Kardashev proposed a scale to quantify an evolving civilization's increasing energy needs. In the first evolutionary stage, which we're currently in, planet-based fuel sources like fossil fuels, solar panels, and nuclear power plants are probably enough to settle other planets inside our own solar system, but not much beyond that. For a civilization on the third and final stage, expansion on a galactic scale would require about 100 billion times more energy than the full 385 yada joules our sun releases every second. Barring a breakthrough in exotic physics, there's only one energy source that could suffice: a supermassive black hole. It's counterintuitive to think of black holes as energy sources, but that's exactly what they are, thanks to their accretion disks, circular, flat structures formed by matter falling into the event horizon. Because of conservation of angular momentum, particles there don't just plummet straight into the black hole. Instead, they slowly spiral. Due to the intense gravitational field of the black hole, these particles convert their potential energy to kinetic energy as they inch closer to the event horizon. Particle interactions allow for this kinetic energy to be radiated out into space at an astonishing matter-to-energy efficiency, 6% for non-rotating black holes and up to 32% for rotating ones. This drastically outshines nuclear fission, currently the most efficient, widely available mechanism to extract energy from mass. Fission converts just 0.08% of a uranium atom into energy. The key to harnessing this power may lie in a structure devised by physicist Freeman Dyson, known as the Dyson sphere. In the 1960s, Dyson proposed that an advanced planetary civilization could engineer an artificial sphere around their main star, capturing all of its radiated energy to satisfy their needs. A similar, though vastly more complicated design could theoretically be applied to black holes. In order to produce energy, black holes need to be continuously fed, so we wouldn't want to fully cover it with a sphere. Even if we did, the plasma jets that shoot from the poles of many supermassive black holes would blow any structure in their way to smithereens. So instead, we might design a sort of Dyson ring made of massive, remotely controlled collectors. They'd swarm in an orbit around the black hole, perhaps on the plane of its accretion disk, but farther out. These devices could use mirror-like panels to transmit the collected energy to a power plant or a battery for storage. We'd need to ensure that these collectors are built at just the right radius. Too close and they'd melt from the radiated energy. Too far and they'd only collect a tiny fraction of the available energy and might be disrupted by stars orbiting the black hole. We would likely need several Earths' worth of highly reflective material like hematite to construct the full system, plus a few more dismantled planets to make a legion of construction robots. Once built, the Dyson ring would be a technological masterpiece, powering a civilization spread across every arm of a galaxy. This all may seem like wild speculation, but even now, in our current energy crisis, we're confronted by the limited resources of our planet. New ways of sustainable energy production will always be needed, especially as humanity works towards the survival and technological progress of our species. Perhaps there's already a civilization out there that has conquered these astronomical giants. We may even be able to tell by seeing the light from their black hole periodically dim as pieces of the Dyson ring pass between us and them. Or maybe these superstructures are fated to remain in the realm of theory. Only time and our scientific ingenuity will tell. Before you go, we highly recommend you check out a book called Children of Time. It's an enthralling sci-fi epic that pits interstellar humans against a surprising but familiar species in a fight for cosmic survival. Support our nonprofit mission by downloading a free audiobook version on audible.com/TED-Ed. By the end of the 20th century, the race to build the world's tallest skyscraper grinded to a halt. Each new contender was only slightly taller than the one before, and architects were running out of ways to top their previous efforts. But in 2004, construction began on a new building in Dubai, promising a revolutionary design that would dwarf the competition. In 2009, the 828-meter Burj Khalifa was complete, surpassing the previous record holder by over 60%. So, what innovations allowed for such a huge leap in height? For most of architectural history, heavy building materials made it difficult for tall buildings to support their own weight. To compensate, taller structures had wider, thicker masonry at the base, making them substantially more expensive. The arrival of industrial steel in the early 20th century helped buildings shed weight and stretch to new heights. But steel frames required intensive labor to produce, often under poor working conditions. And when they were finished, these three-dimensional grids took up huge amounts of space inside buildings. Tall steel skyscrapers also had larger, less dense surfaces, making them vulnerable to strong winds. Architects designed various countermeasures to prevent swaying and structural damage, but to increase height further, engineers would have to completely rethink how tall buildings were designed. Enter the father of modern skyscrapers, Fazlur Rahman Khan. This Bangladeshi-American engineer believed tall structures should bear their weight where they were widest and most stable, on the outside. He proposed swapping an internal grid of steel beams for a steel and concrete exoskeleton that would make buildings more resilient to wind while using far less heavy materials. Khan developed this idea into what he called tubular designs. These buildings had exterior steel frames that were braced with concrete connected to horizontal floor beams. Tubular frames proved superior at absorbing and transferring the force of wind to a building's foundation. And since the exterior walls could bear the bulk of the load, internal supporting columns could be removed to maximize space.
Not sure about that.
In the 1960s, tubular design became the industry standard. This new philosophy allowed for the construction of taller, sturdier skyscrapers, including many of the record holders for world's tallest building. But planning the Burj Khalifa would take one more innovation. In 2004, the late Fazlur Khan's longtime employers, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, completed the Tower Palace 3 in South Korea. This building took Khan's exoskeleton design one step further, with a central column supported by 3 protruding wings. Each wing's weight carries the other 2, while the heavy concrete core acts as a support. It also houses the building's elevators and mechanical infrastructure. This design, called the buttressed core, allowed the entire structure to work as a single load-bearing unit, supporting the building's 73 stories. SOM calculated the buttressed core could support a much taller building, and they were determined to see how high they could go with their next project. As only the second building to use this design, the Burj Khalifa spans an unprecedented 160 kilometers. To battle the monumental vertical and lateral forces, the design strategically places the strongest load-bearing areas where the wind is also most powerful. Additionally, the Y-shaped layout was specifically calibrated to minimize local wind forces. Every several floors, one of the wings recedes slightly. forming a series of
Really?
setbacks in a clockwise pattern. This spiral shape disperses air currents, transforming 240 km/h winds into harmless gusts. Considering its height and unique design, the Burj Khalifa was completed in a staggeringly short 5-year period. However, this pace came at a great cost. The workforce consisted mostly of South Asian migrants who regularly endured shifts over 12 hours long for a daily wage of roughly $10. Those who tried to quit or return home had their paychecks and passports withheld by the project's construction company. These abusive conditions led to multiple protests, in addition to at least one suicide and one fatal accident reported on site. In the years following the tower's completion, the United Arab Emirates fell under harsh scrutiny for failing to enforce worker protection laws. Hopefully, future projects
Shit, I lost the QTE. Shit.
The Burj Khalifa is currently the tallest building in the world. But how high can we go? What about a mile-high skyscraper? Check out this video to find out if such a mega structure is even possible. Or, for something more terrestrial, discover why cities need trees to survive.
Oh wait, oh yeah, I'm using tuck already. Let's try again.
Hello everyone, let's begin our guided tour. Welcome to the Museum of Museums. Museums have been a part of human history for over 2,000 years, but they weren't always like the ones we visit today. The history of museums is far older and much stranger than you might imagine. We'll start over here in the Greek word. Our word museum comes from the Greek museon.
Oh shit.
Temples built for the muses, the goddesses of the arts and
Too
sciences.
early. The Zen Z
Someone
Wolf
can
hasn't
ask the muses to keep watch
refresh.
over academics and grant ingenuity to those they deemed worthy. The temples were filled with offerings of sculptures, mosaics, complex scientific apparatuses, poetic and literary inscriptions, and any other tribute that would demonstrate a moral's worthiness for divine inspiration.
Oh my god, why?
We have
I always
arrived at the Mesopotamian wing. The first museum was created in 530 BC in what is now Iraq, and the first pyramid was actually a princess. Enegaldinata started to collect and house Mesopotamian antiquities in Egi-Far, perhaps. When archaeologists excavated the area, they discovered dozens of artifacts neatly arranged in rows, with clay labels written in 3 languages. She must have had interesting parties. The tradition of collecting and displaying intriguing items began to be made, as you can see here in the Roman Empire wing. Treasure houses of politicians and generals were filled with the spoils of war, and royal menageries displayed exotic animals to the public on special occasions like gladiator parades. As you can see, we have a lion here and a gladiator, and, well, the janitor ought to be in this wing, clearly. Moving on, hurry along. The next step in the evolution of museums occurred in the Renaissance, when the study of the natural world was once again encouraged after almost a millennium of Western ignorance. Curiosity cabinets, also referred to as wunderkammers, were collections of objects that acted as a kind
How
of
can they
physical
get like
encyclopedia,
850?
showcasing artifacts.
How?
Just step into the wardrobe here, there you go, mind the coats, and we'll tour Ola
I think they
Worm's
skipped the first
cabinet.
official
One of the
ultimate.
most notable wunderkammers belonged to
Let's
a
try.
wealthy 17th century naturalist, antiquarian, and physician, Ola Worm. Ola Worm collected natural specimens, human skeletons, ancient runic texts, and artifacts from New World. In other curiosity cabinets, you could find genetic anomalies, precious stones, works of art, and religious and historic relics. Oh my, you might not want to touch that. These cabinets were private, again, often in residencies, curated by their owners, rulers and aristocrats, as well as merchants and early scientists. Now,
What
who
the
hears a circus organ? In the 1840s, an enterprising young showman named Phineas T. Barnum purchased some of the more famous cabinets of curiosity from Europe and started Barnum's American Museum in New York City, a spectacular hodgepodge of zoo, lecture hall, wax museum, theater, and freak show that was known for its eclectic residents, such as bears, elephants, acrobats, giants, Siamese twins, a Fiji mermaid, and a bearded lady, along with a host of modern machinery and scientific instruments. Museums open to the public are a relatively new phenomenon. Before Barnum, the first public museums were only accessible by the upper and middle classes, and only on certain days. Visitors would have to apply to visit the museum in writing prior to admission, and only small groups could visit the museum each day. The Louvre famously allowed all members of the public
Oh,
into the
great, I
museum,
fucked up.
but only 3 days a week.
Motherfucker.
In the 19th century, the museum as we know it began to take shape. Institutions like the Smithsonian were started so that objects could be seen and studied, not just locked away. American museums in particular commissioned experiments and hired explorers to seek out and retrieve natural samples. Museums became centers for scholarship and artistic and scientific discovery. This is often called the museum age. Nowadays, museums are open to everybody, are centers of learning and research, and are turning into more hands-on institutions. But the question of who gets to go is still relevant, as ticket prices can sometimes bar admission to those future scholars, artists, and targets of divine inspiration who can't afford to satisfy their curiosity. Thank you all for coming, and please feel free to stop by the gift shop of gift shops on your way out. What do a 17-year-old Pakistani, a Norwegian explorer, a Tibetan monk, and an American pastor have in common? They were all awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Among the top prestigious awards in the world, this prize has honored some of the most celebrated and revered international figures and organizations in history. To understand how it all got started, we have to go back to the 1800s. Swedish chemist Alfred Nobel was then mostly known for the invention of dynamite, a breakthrough which launched his career as a successful inventor and businessman. 30 years later, he had become extremely wealthy, but never married and had no children. When his will was opened after his death, it came as a surprise that his fortune was to be used for 5 prizes in physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace. These prizes illustrated his lifelong commitment to sciences and his passion for literature. But what about peace? Because Nobel's name is tied to inventions used in the war industry, many have assumed that he created the Peace Prize out of regret. However, this is all speculation, as he never expressed any such sentiments, and his inventions were also used for constructive purposes. Instead, many historians connect Alfred Nobel's interest for the peace cause to his decade-long friendship and correspondence with an Austrian pacifist named Bertha von Suttner. Von Suttner was one of the leaders of the international peace movement, and in 1905, after Nobel's death, she became the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Nobel's will outlined 3 criteria for the Peace Prize, which, unlike the other Sweden-based prizes, would be administered in Norway: disarmament, peace congresses, and brotherhood between nations. These standards have since been expanded to include other ways of promoting peace, such as human rights and negotiations. And the prize doesn't just have to go to one person. About a third of Nobel Peace Prizes have been shared by 2 or 3 laureates. So how do nominations for the prize work?
I know it.
According to the Nobel Foundation, a valid nomination can come from a member of a national assembly, state government, or an international court. Eligible nominators also include university rectors, professors of the social sciences, history, philosophy, law, and theology, and previous recipients of the Peace Prize. But if you want to know more about who was recently nominated, you'll have to be patient. All information about nominations remains secret for 50 years. Take Martin Luther King Jr. We didn't actually know who nominated him until 2014. His nominators turned out to be the Quakers, who had won the prize previously, and 8 members of the Swedish parliament. There's no limit to the number of times a person or organization can be nominated. In fact, Jane Addams, recognized as the founder of social work in the United States, was nominated 91 times before finally being awarded the prize. The absence of a laureate can also be symbolic. The 1948 decision not to award the prize following the death of Mahatma Gandhi has been interpreted as an attempt to respectfully honor the so-called missing laureate. As with the other Nobel Prizes, the Peace Prize can't be awarded posthumously. The secret selection process takes almost a year and is carried out by the 5 appointed members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, who are forbidden from having any official political function in Norway. Starting with a large pool of nominations, exceeding 300 in recent years, they assess each candidate's work and create a shortlist. Finally, the chairman of the Nobel Committee publicly announces the laureate in October. The award ceremony takes place on December 10th, the anniversary of Alfred Nobel's death. The prize itself includes a gold medal inscribed with the Latin words Pro Pace et Fraternitate Gentium, or for the peace and brotherhood of men, as well as a diploma and a large cash prize. Recently, it's been 8 million Swedish krona, or roughly $1 million, which is split in the case of multiple laureates. And while laureates can use the prize money as they choose, in recent years, many have donated it to humanitarian or social causes.
What the heck?
For many years, the Nobel Peace Prize was predominantly awarded to European and North American men. But in recent years, significant changes have been taking place, making the prize more global than ever. 23 organizations and 103 individuals, that's 87 men and 16 women, have made up the 126 Nobel Peace Prize laureates in history. They include Desmond Tutu for his nonviolent campaign against apartheid in South Africa, Jody Williams for her campaign to ban and clear anti-personnel mines, Rigoberta Menchú Tum for her work for social justice and reconciliation based on respect for the rights of indigenous peoples, Marty Ahtisaari for his efforts to resolve international conflicts in Namibia, Kosovo, and Indonesia, and Aung San Suu Kyi for her nonviolent struggle for democracy and human rights in Myanmar. They're just a few examples of the people who have inspired us, challenged us, and demonstrated through their actions that there are many paths to peace.
The dark history of bananas.
On a December night in 1910, the exiled former leader of Honduras, Manuel Bonilla, boarded a borrowed yacht in New Orleans. With a group of heavily armed accomplices, he set sail for Honduras in hopes of reclaiming power by whatever means necessary. Bonilla had a powerful backer, the future leader of a notorious organization known throughout Latin America as El Pulpo, or the Octopus, for its long reach. The infamous El Pulpo was a U.S. corporation trafficking in, of all things, bananas. It was officially known as United Fruit Company, or Chiquita Brands International, today. First cultivated in Southeast Asia thousands of years ago, bananas reached the Americas in the early 1500s, where enslaved Africans cultivated them in plots alongside sugar plantations. There were many different bananas, most of which looked nothing like the bananas in supermarket aisles today. In the 1800s, captains from New Orleans and New England ventured to the Caribbean in search of coconuts and other goods.
Not usable.
They began to experiment with bananas, purchasing one kind called Gros Michel from Afro-Caribbean farmers in Jamaica, Cuba, and Honduras. Gros Michel bananas produced large bunches of relatively thick-skinned fruit, ideal for
Thick-skinned
shipping.
fruit.
By the end of the 1800s, bananas were a hit in the US. They were affordable, available year-round, and endorsed by medical doctors. As bananas became big business, US fruit companies wanted to grow their own bananas. In order to secure access to land, banana moguls lobbied and bribed government officials in Central America and even funded coups to ensure they had allies in power. In Honduras, Manuel Bonilla repaid the banana man who had financed his return to power with land concessions. By the 1930s, one company dominated the region, United Fruit, who owned
United Fruit?
50% of Guatemala's arable land at one point. They cleared rainforests in Costa Rica, Colombia,
United
Guatemala,
Fruit?
Honduras,
That will
and
be-
Panama to build plantations, along with railroads, ports, and towns to house workers. Lured by relatively high-paying jobs, people migrated to banana zones.
Banana
From
zone.
Guatemala to Colombia, United Fruit's plantations grew exclusively Gros Michel bananas. These densely packed farms
Banana
had little
zone.
biological diversity, making them ripe for disease epidemics. The infrastructure connecting these vulnerable farms could quickly spread disease. Pathogens could hitch a ride from one farm to another on workers' boots, railroad cars, and steamships. That's exactly what happened in the 1910s, when a fungus began to level Gros Michel banana plantations, first in
Damn.
Panama and later throughout Central America, spreading quickly via the same system that had enabled big profits and cheap bananas. In a race against Panama disease, banana companies abandoned infected plantations in Costa Rica, Honduras, and Guatemala, leaving thousands of farmers and workers jobless. The companies then felled extensive tracts of rainforests in order to establish new plantations. After World War II, the dictatorships with which United Fruit had partnered in Guatemala and Honduras
Ồ, vãi lều.
yielded to
Không chết luôn kìa.
democratically elected governments that called for land reform.
Ow, ow, ow,
In
ow.
Guatemala, President Jacobo Arbenz tried to buy back land from United Fruit and redistribute it to landless farmers. The Arbenz government offered
United
to pay a
Fruit?
price
Ow,
based
right?
on tax records, where United Fruit had underreported the value of the land. El Pulpo was not happy. The company launched propaganda campaigns against Arbenz and called on its deep connections in the US government for help.
Cái lùm mía mất
Citing
quê tè, vãi lều.
fears of communism, the CIA orchestrated the overthrow of the democratically elected Arbenz in 1954. That same year, in Honduras, thousands of
What the
United Fruit
fuck?
workers went on strike until the company agreed to recognize a new labor union. With the political and economic costs of running from Panama disease escalating, United Fruit finally switched from Gros Michel to Panama disease-resistant Cavendish bananas in the early 1960s. Today, bananas are no longer as economically vital in Central America, and United Fruit Company, rechristened Chiquita, has lost its stranglehold on Latin American
Ủa
politics.
má, sao mất
But
quê
the
tè
modern
ta?
banana industry
Cái lùm mía
isn't
sao mất được?
without problems.
the
Cavendish
fuck?
bananas require frequent applications of pesticides that create hazards for farm workers and ecosystems. And though they're resistant to the particular
the
pathogen
fuck?
that affected Gros Michel bananas, Cavendish farms also lack biological diversity, leaving the banana trade ripe for another pandemic. You've probably noticed that when your bananas ripen, they get little brown spots all over the peel. What are those? And is it still okay to eat? Find out what makes your produce go mushy and brown with this video.
Má mất QT luôn kìa.
Take a look at the water in this glass. Refreshing, hydrating, and survival. How do you know that the water inside is free from disease-causing pollutants? 10 people in the world can't actually be sure that their water is clean and safe to drink. Why is that?
View to lúc nhỏ
Inadequate
ra.
sanitation, poor protection of drinking water sources, and improper hygiene often lead to species of contaminated water. The ideal living area for dangerous bacteria, viruses, and microbes. And the effects of these pathogens are staggering. Diarrheal disease from unsafe water causes death around the world for children under 5. And according to a UN report, microbial waterborne illnesses kill more people per year than war.
Mất QT, đu.
Proper treatment processes, though, can address these threats. They usually have 3 parts: sedimentation, filtration, and disinfection. Once water has been collected in a treatment facility, it's ready to drink. The first step, sedimentation, just takes time. The water sits on the surface, allowing the heavier particles to sink to the bottom. Often, particles are just too small to be removed by sedimentation and need to be filtered. Wash the water down through layers of sand that catch leftover particles in their pores, prepping the water for its final treatment. A dose of disinfectant. Forms of chlorine and ozone are mixed into pathogens and to disinfect surfaces. Chlorine is highly effective in destroying water's living organisms, but its use remains unregulated and has potentially dangerous byproducts. And if an imbalance of chlorine occurs during the disinfection process, it can trigger other chemical reactions. Levels of chlorine like trihalogens, good skylight, lead to pipe corrosion, copper, water contamination from these and other sources, including leaching, chemical spills, and runoffs, has been linked to long-term health effects like cancer, cardiovascular and neurological diseases, and miscarriage. Unfortunately, analyzing the exact risks of water contamination
Má đét.
is difficult. So while it's clear that disinfectants make us safer by removing disease-causing pathogens, experts have yet to determine the full scope of how the chemical cocktail in our drinking water really impacts human health. So how can you tell whether the water you have access to, whether from a tap or otherwise, is drinkable? Firstly, too much turbidity, trace organic compounds, or high-density heavy metals like arsenic, chromium, or lead mean that the water is unsuitable for consumption. A lot of
Unsuitable.
things, like lead or arsenic, won't be obvious without tests, but some clues, like cloudiness, brown or yellow coloration, a foul odor, or an excessive chlorine smell, can indicate the need to investigate further. Water testing kits can go a step further and confirm the presence of many different contaminants and
Ủa, xe
chemicals.
đâu ta?
With many types of contamination, there are ways of treating water where it's used instead of close to its source. Point-of-use treatment has actually been around for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians boiled away many organic contaminants with the sun's heat. And in ancient Greece, Hippocrates designed a bag that trapped bad-tasting sediments from water. Today, point-of-use processes usually involve ionization to lower mineral content. They also use adsorption filtration, where a porous material called activated carbon
Ông này
strains the
không có
water
sách
to
adrift.
remove contaminants and chemical byproducts. While it's not always an effective long-term solution, point-of-use treatment is portable, easy to install, and adaptable. And in regions where large-scale systems are unavailable, or where water has been contaminated further along its journey, these systems can mean the difference between life and death. Clean
Life
water
and
remains
death.
a precious and often scarce commodity. There are nearly 800 million of us who still don't have regular access to it. The good news is that continued developments in water treatment, both on a large
Má,
and
tao ấy đâu.
small scale, can alleviate a lot of unsafe conditions. Implementing proper systems where they're needed and paying careful attention to the ones already in place will fulfill one of the most basic of our human needs. doesn't last. In days, sometimes hours, bread goes moldy, apple slices turn brown, and bacteria multiply in mayonnaise. But you can find all of these foods out on the shelf at the grocery store, hopefully unspoiled, thanks to preservatives. But what exactly are preservatives? How do they help keep food edible? And are they good? There are two major factors that cause food to go bad: microbes and oxidation.
Yeah, no bug,
Microbes
no
like
damage.
bacteria and fungi invade food and feed off its nutrients. Some of these can cause disease, like listeria and botulism. Others just turn edibles into a smelly, slimy, moldy mess. Meanwhile, oxidation is a chemical change in the food's molecule caused by enzymes or free radicals, which turn fats rancid and brown produce like apples
We have a
and
new problem
potatoes.
now.
Preservatives can prevent both types of deterioration. Before the invention of artificial refrigeration, fungi and bacteria could run rampant in food. So we found ways to create an inhospitable environment for microbes. For example, making
the
the
heck
food
can I
more
do now?
acidic unravels enzymes that microbes need to survive.
We
And
all
some
know
types
that
of bacteria can
Brazil is
actually help.
strong, but he
For
only
thousands
has
of years,
B.
people preserved food using bacteria
Not
that
even
produce
any other
lactic
stigma.
acid. The acid turns
the
perishable
fuck?
vegetables and milk into longer-lasting foods like sauerkraut in Europe, kimchi in Korea, and yogurt in the Middle East. These cultured foods also populate
gonna
your
check
digestive tract
other-
with beneficial microbes. Many synthetic preservatives are also acids. Benzoic acid in salad dressing, sorbic acid in cheese,
I'm gonna try
and propionic
checking
acid
the
in baked
references.
goods. Are they safe? Some studies suggest that benzoates related to benzoic acid contribute to hyperactive behavior, but the results
Sheesh.
aren't conclusive. Otherwise, these acids seem to be perfectly safe.
This is how maroon.
Another antimicrobial strategy is to add a lot of sugar, like in jam, or salt, like in salted meats. Sugar and salt hold on to water that microbes need to grow, and actually suck moisture out of any cells that may be hanging around,
fuck.
thus destroying
Not
them.
usable.
Of course, too much sugar and salt
his
can increase
SDA,
your
not
risk of heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure. So these preservatives
This
are
is
best
getting
in
hard
moderation.
now.
Antimicrobial nitrates and nitrites, often found in cured meats, ward off the bacteria that cause botulism, but they may cause other health problems. Some studies linking cured meats to cancer have suggested that these preservatives may be the culprit. Meanwhile, antioxidant preservatives prevent the chemical changes that can give food an off flavor or color. Smoke has been used to preserve food for millennia because some of the aromatic compounds in wood smoke are antioxidants. Combining smoking with salting was an effective way of preserving meat before refrigeration. For antioxidant activity without a smoky flavor, there are compounds like BHT and tocopherol, better known as vitamin E. Like the compounds in smoke, these sop up free radicals and stave off rancid flavors that can develop in foods like oils,
Let's see if
cheese,
this even
and
works.
cereal. Other antioxidants like citric acid and ascorbic acid help cut produce keep its color by thwarting the enzyme that causes browning. Some compounds like sulfites will multitask. They're both antimicrobials and antioxidants. Sulfites may cause allergy symptoms in some
no
people,
time fracture.
but
Cool.
most antioxidant preservatives are generally recognized as safe. So should you be worried about preservatives? Well, they're usually near the end of the ingredients list because they're used in very small amounts, determined by the FDA to be safe. Nevertheless, some consumers and companies are trying to find alternatives.
Oh, not enough
Packaging
SD.
tricks,
What the
like
fuck?
reducing the oxygen around the food can help, but without some kind of chemical assistance, there are very few foods that can stay shelf stable for long.
Not enough SD. This is pretty fucked. Or we can sacrifice something.
In 1800, The explorer Alexander von Humboldt witnessed a swarm of electric eels leap out of the water to defend themselves against oncoming horses. Most people thought the story so unusual that Humboldt made it up. But fish using electricity is more common than you might think. And yes, electric eels are a type of fish. Underwater, where light is scarce, electrical signals offer ways to communicate, navigate, and find, plus in rare cases stun, prey.
Thus,
Nearly
prey.
350 species of fish have specialized anatomical structures that generate and detect electrical signals. These fish are divided
What
into
the
two
fuck?
groups, depending on how much electricity they produce. Scientists call the first group the weakly electric fish. Structures near their tails, called electric organs, produce up to a volt of electricity, about 2/3 as much as a AA battery. How does this work? The fish's brain sends a signal through its nervous system to the
What the
electric organ,
still dead?
which is filled with stacks of hundreds or thousands
Jesus.
of disc-shaped
Oh, wow.
cells called electrocytes. Normally, electrocytes pump out sodium and potassium ions
Shit.
to maintain a positive charge outside and negative charge inside.
show what?
But when the nerve signal arrives
don't
at the
show.
electrocyte, it prompts the ion gates to open. Positively charged ions flow back in. Now, one
Oh
face
my
of the
God, why
electrocyte
so
is
dead?
negatively charged outside
Why so
and
dead?
positively charged inside. But the far side has the opposite charge pattern. These alternating charges can drive a current, turning the electrocyte into a biological battery. The key to these fishes' powers is that nerve signals are coordinated to arrive at each cell at exactly the same time. That makes the stacks of electrocytes act like
Wow, this
thousands of
feels
batteries in series.
Impossible.
The tiny charges from each one add up to an electrical field that can travel several meters. Cells called electroreceptors buried in the skin allow the
it's
fish
barely
to
enough.
constantly sense this
Barely.
field and the changes to
Barely.
it caused by the surroundings or other fish. The Peter's elephant nose fish, for example, has an elongated chin called a
shit.
schnauzing organ that's riddled in electroreceptors. That allows it to intercept signals from other fish, judge distances, detect the shape and size of nearby objects, and even determine
Damn,
whether a
why?
buried insect is dead or
The
alive.
fuck?
But the elephant nose and other weakly electric fish don't produce enough electricity to attack their prey. That ability belongs to the strongly electric fish, of which
Oh,
there are
come
only
on.
a handful of species. The most powerful strongly electric fish
No,
is
should
the
not.
electric knife fish, more commonly known as the electric eel. 3 electric organs span almost its entire 2-meter
never
body.
on.
Like the weakly electric fish, the electric eel uses its signals to navigate and communicate, but it reserves its strongest electric discharges for hunting, using a 2-phase
No,
attack
man,
that susses out and then incapacitates
That's
its
right.
prey. First,
That's right.
it emits 2 or 3 strong pulses, as much as 600 volts. These stimulate the prey's muscles, sending it into spasms and generating waves that reveal its hiding place. Then a volley of fast, high-voltage discharges causes even more intense muscle contractions. The electric
để biết chơi
eel
kiểu gì.
can also curl up so that the electric fields generated at each end of the electric organ overlap. The electrical storm eventually exhausts and immobilizes the prey, and the electric eel can swallow its meal alive. The other 2 strongly electric fish are the electric catfish, which can unleash 350 volts with an electric organ that occupies most of its torso, and the electric ray, with kidney-shaped electric organs on either side of its head that produce as much as 220
Tim này chơi được
volts.
không ta?
There is one mystery in the world of electric fish. Why don't they electrocute themselves? It may be that the size of strongly electric fish allows them to withstand their own shocks, or that the current passes out of their bodies too quickly. Some scientists think that special proteins may shield the electric organs. But the truth is, this is one mystery science still hasn't illuminated. TED-Ed is a non-profit. If you value our work, please consider
đến Dead
supporting it
nào.
on patreon.com/TEDEd.
I feel dead. I can sense the deathness.
In the spring of 1947, 6 Scandinavian explorers noticed a strange phenomenon while crossing the Pacific Ocean. Somehow, small squid, known to live deep beneath the waves, kept appearing on the roof of their boat. The crew was mystified until they saw the squids soaring above the sea for roughly 50 meters. On land, people could barely believe the explorers. It seemed impossible that sea creatures without wings or bones could fly at all, let alone travel half the length of a football field. But over the next several decades, more reports began to surface. Sailors described airborne squid keeping pace with motorboats. Researchers reported captive squid escaping their tanks overnight. And as cameras became widespread, seafarers finally began capturing proof of these high-flying cephalopods. But how and why do these marine creatures take to the sky? While only a few squid species have been recorded taking flight, most squid are alike in the way they traverse the ocean. The outside of a squid's body is a massive tube of muscle called the mantle. Water enters that tube through small openings around the squid's head. Then, muscles clamp these openings shut, and the squid forcefully pumps the water through the base of their body.
Pump the water?
In practice, this makes the mantle a miniature jetpack, propelling squid through the water at 10 kilometers per hour. This process is also how squid breathe. Squid gills rest inside the mantle and siphon oxygen from the water being pushed past them. With gills full of air and a mantle full of water, squid can outpace predators and pursue their prey. Or, in the case of some species, they can smash through the ocean's surface and attempt an epic flight. Without the resistance of water, a squid's acceleration is the same as a car, going from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in just over a second. At speeds of 40 kilometers per hour, squid quickly generate aerodynamic lift. But to stay in the air, they'll need something like wings. Fortunately, our soaring cephalopod has a plan. Squid tentacles are muscular hydrostats, meaning the tissue can be held firm by muscle tension. Splaying its tentacles in a rigid formation, the squid transforms them into flexible wing-like structures that stabilize its flight. At the opposite end of its body, 2 fins typically used for gentle swimming find new purpose as a second set of wings. And by folding these fins down, a squid can streamline itself and dip back into the ocean. There have been too few observations to establish what a squid's typical flight trajectory looks like. Based on their flying speed, a 10-centimeter squid could hypothetically launch itself 6 meters above the water. But from what scientists have seen, flying squid tend to glide low, keeping close to the surface. This trajectory allows squid to cover the most horizontal distance possible over a typical several-second flight. It also makes it easy to dive back into the water for more fuel, or to make a quick escape from predatory birds.
He doesn't even have.
But why do squids fly at all? Leading theories suggest that flight is an escape behavior, as flying squid generally seem to be fleeing a nearby predator or ship. Other researchers think their flight may be an energy-saving migration strategy, because it takes less energy to move quickly through the air than through water. However, it's also possible that learning to fly may be a vital part of surviving adolescence. Young, smaller squid can potentially fly faster and farther than their larger relatives. And since adult squid tend to cannibalize juveniles, soaring above the surf can help ensure these young squid will live to fly another day. In oceans filled with apex predators, how do squids manage to thwart creatures like sharks, whales, and other squid? Dive into the extraordinary ways these stealthy cephalopods have mastered deep-sea survival with this video.
The ravenous swarm stretches as far as the eye can see. It has no commanding general or strategic plan. Its only goals are to eat, breed, and move on. A relentless advance that transforms pastures and farms into barren wastelands. These are desert locusts, infamous among their locust cousins for their massive swarms and capacity for destruction. But these insects aren't always so insatiable. In fact, most of the time, desert locusts are no more dangerous than garden variety grasshoppers. So what does it take to...
Wait a second. Admin thôi. Admin đợt này chưa cút nữa rồi. Bú.
Captain on bridge.
Beta tester. Mấy tuần mấy ta? Mấy tuần
In
2 tuần
January
3.
of 1995, Russia detected a nuclear missile headed its way. The alert went all the way to the president, who was deciding whether to strike back when another system contradicted the initial warning. What they'd thought was the first missile in a massive attack was actually a research rocket studying the Northern Lights. This incident happened after the end of the Cold War, but was nevertheless one of the closest calls we've had to igniting a global nuclear war. With the invention of the atomic bomb, humanity gained the power to destroy itself for the first time in our history. Since then, our existential risk of either extinction or the unrecoverable collapse of human civilization, has steadily increased. It's well within our power to reduce this risk. But in order to do so, we have to understand which of our activities pose existential threats now, and which might in the
everyone
future.
800s.
So far, our species
And
has
beyond
survived
800s.
2,000 centuries, each with some extinction risk from natural causes, asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, and the like. Assessing existential risk is an inherently uncertain business, because usually, when we try to figure out how likely something is, we check how often it's happened before. But the complete destruction of humanity has never happened before. While there's no perfect method to determine our risk from natural threats, experts estimate it's about 1 in 10,000 per century. Nuclear weapons were our first addition to that baseline. While there are many risks associated with nuclear weapons, the existential risk comes from the possibility of a global nuclear war that leads to a nuclear winter, where soot from burning cities blocks out the sun for years, causing the crops that humanity depends on to fail. We haven't had a nuclear war yet, but our track record is too short to tell if they are inherently unlikely or we've simply been lucky. We also can't say for sure whether a global nuclear war would cause a nuclear winter so severe it would pose an existential threat to humanity. The next major addition to our existential risk is climate change. Like nuclear war, climate change could result in a lot of terrible scenarios that we should be working hard to avoid, but that would stop short of causing extinction or unrecoverable collapse. We expect a few degrees Celsius of warming, but can't yet completely rule out 6 or even 10 degrees, which would cause a calamity of possibly unprecedented proportions. Even in this worst-case scenario, it's not clear whether warming would pose a direct existential risk, but the disruption it would cause would likely make us more vulnerable to other existential risks. The greatest risks may come from technologies that are still emerging. Take engineered pandemics. The biggest catastrophes in human history have been from pandemics. and biotechnology is enabling us to modify and create germs that could be much more deadly than naturally occurring ones. Such germs could cause pandemics through bio-warfare and research accidents, decreased costs of genome sequencing and modification, along with increased availability of potentially dangerous information, like the published genomes of deadly viruses, also increase the number of people and groups who could potentially create such pathogens. Another concern is unaligned AI. Most AI researchers think this will be the century where we develop artificial intelligence that surpasses human abilities across the board. If we see this advantage, we place our future in the hands of the systems we create. Even if created solely with humanity's best interest in mind, super-intelligent AI could pose an existential risk if it isn't perfectly aligned with human values, a task scientists are finding extremely difficult. Based on what we know at this point, some experts estimate the anthropogenic existential risk is more than 100 times higher than the background rate of natural risk. But these odds depend heavily on human choices, because most of the risk is from human action and it's within human control. If we treat safeguarding humanity's future as the defining issue of our time, we can reduce this risk. Whether humanity fulfills its potential or not
why so dead?
is in our hands. So just how likely are each of these risks? To learn more about how we can assess existential risks, including detailed estimates for every risk we've mentioned, we highly recommend The Precipice by Toby Ord.
Oh my god, OP.
At this very moment, almost everything around you is being eaten. Invisible to the naked eye, organisms called microbes swarm every surface. Hordes of bacteria, archaea, and fungi have evolved to produce powerful enzymes that break down tough organic material into digestible nutrients. But there's one particularly widespread type of material that almost no microbes can biodegrade: plastics. To make most plastics, molecules from oil, gas, and coal are refined and turned into long, repeating chains called polymers. This process often requires temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius, incredibly high pressure, and various chemical modifications. The resulting man-made polymers are quite different from the polymers found in nature, and since they've only been around since the 1950s, most microbes haven't had time to evolve enzymes to digest them. Making matters even more difficult, breaking most plastics' chemical bonds requires high temperatures comparable to those used to create them, and such heat is deadly to most microbes. This means that most plastics never biologically degrade. They just turn into countless tiny, indigestible pieces. And pieces from the most common plastics, like polyethylene, polypropylene, and polyester terephthalate, have been piling up for decades. Each year, humanity produces roughly 400 million more tons of plastic, 80% of which is discarded as trash. Of that plastic waste, only 10% is recycled. 60% gets incinerated or goes into the landfills, and 30% leaks out into the environment, where it will pollute natural ecosystems for centuries. An estimated 10 million tons of plastic waste end up in the ocean each year, mostly in the form of microplastic fragments that pollute the food chain. Fortunately, there are microbes that may be able to take a bite out of this growing problem. In 2016, a team of Japanese researchers sampling sludge at a plastic bottle recycling plant discovered Ideonella sacchinensis 201 F6. This never-before-identified bacterium contained 2 enzymes capable of slowly breaking down PET polymers at relatively low temperatures.
Come on, babe.
Researchers isolated the genes coding for these plastic-digesting enzymes, allowing other bioengineers to combine and improve the pair, creating super enzymes that could break down PET up to 6 times faster. Even with this boost, these lab-grown enzymes still took weeks to degrade a thin film of PET, and they operated best at temperatures below 40 degrees Celsius. However, another group of scientists in Japan had been researching bacterial enzymes adapted to high-temperature environments like compost piles. And within one particularly warm pile of rotting leaves and branches, they found gene sequences for powerful degrading enzymes known as leaf-branch compost cutaneases. Using fast-growing microorganisms, other researchers were able to genetically engineer high quantities of these enzymes. They then enhanced and selected special variants of the cutaneases that could degrade PET plastic in environments reaching 70 degrees Celsius, a high temperature that can weaken PET polymers and make them digestible. With the help of these and other tiny diehards, the future of PET recycling looks promising, but PET is just one type of plastic. We still need ways to biologically degrade all the other types, including abundant PEs and PPs, which only begin breaking down at temperatures well above 130 degrees Celsius. Researchers don't currently know of any microbes or enzymes tough enough to tolerate such temperatures.
Damn. That's
So
much
for
more
now,
tanky.
the main way we deal with these plastics is through energy-intensive physical and chemical processes. Today, only a small fraction
what?
of
It's
plastic
that
waste
time.
can be biologically degraded by microbes. Researchers are looking for more heat-tolerant plastivores in the planet's most hostile environments and engineering better plastivorous enzymes in the lab. But we can't rely solely on these tiny helpers to clean up our enormous mess.
Let's see.
We need to
Let's
completely
try
rethink
this.
our relationship with plastics, make better use of existing plastics, and stop producing more of the same. And we urgently need to design more environmentally friendly types of polymers that our growing entourage of plastivores can easily break down.
Oh,
Plastic has only
are
been used
tanky.
widely since the early 20th century.
Fuck.
So how
I
did
don't
it
need
come to
to.
be everywhere? Take a look back at the invention of plastic with this video. Or find out what really happens to the plastic bottles you throw away with this video.
In the fall of 1960, Frances Oldham Kelsey was one of the Food and Drug Administration's newest recruits. Before the year was out, she would begin a fight that would save thousands of lives, though no one knew it at the time. Although she was new to the FDA, Kelsey was no novice as a scientist. After graduating from high school at age 15, she enrolled at McGill University in Montreal and earned both undergraduate and master's degrees in pharmacology. From there, she applied for a research post at the University of Chicago's Pharmacology Department. Her acceptance letter was addressed to Mr. Oldham. Kelsey later joked that had her name been Elizabeth or Mary Jane, her career might have ended there. Fortunately, it didn't. She earned her doctorate in pharmacology and accepted Chicago's invitation to stay as faculty, where she undertook pioneering research on drugs and food safety. In 1950, she earned an MD, her fourth and final degree. By the time she joined the FDA, Frances Kelsey was one of the most educated, experienced scientists around. Yet, as the newest member of the team, Kelsey was assigned what everyone thought would be an easy review, an application from the U.S. drug company Merrill to sell a drug called thalidomide. Thalidomide was a sedative developed in Germany that was already being widely used in dozens of countries to treat insomnia and workplace stress. Thalidomide's anti-nausea properties also made it a popular remedy for pregnant women with morning sickness. Reviewing Merrill's application, Kelsey found its data on thalidomide's absorption and toxicity inadequate. Today, the FDA classifies drugs based on their safety for a fetus. But in 1960, many experts believed that the placental barrier shielded a fetus from harm. Kelsey's earlier animal-based research demonstrated the opposite. Drugs could pass from mother to fetus through the placenta. Like other drug companies at this time, Merrill had not tested its drug on living animals. Kelsey later said Merrill's evidence for thalidomide safety seemed more like testimonials than the results of well-designed studies. Kelsey rejected Merrill's application and asked them to submit a second, backed by better evidence.
Damn.
FDA colleagues supported this decision.
So fucking dead.
Merrill had expected a quick affirmative reply so it could launch the thalidomide for the holiday season when sedative sales soared. Instead of supplying Kelsey with the data she requested, they first tried to convince her to approve the drug over a series of calls and visits. When these failed to sway her, Merrill executives complained that stubborn and nitpicking Kelsey was the problem, not thalidomide. The FDA backed Kelsey, forcing Merrill to file another application, and another, and another. As Kelsey reviewed and rejected each new application, news of thalidomide's adverse side effects began to surface. Doctors reported cases of nerve damage in early 1961, and by fall, they'd unmasked a more horrible truth. Thalidomide, widely used by pregnant women, caused severe birth defects. Thousands of babies died in utero, and tens of thousands more were born with extra appendages, shorter limbs, or no limbs at all. In November 1961, thalidomide was pulled from the German market. Nonetheless, Merrill continued trying to get it approved in the US for several months before withdrawing their sixth and final application. While Kelsey wasn't the only scientist to identify the risks of thalidomide, she sounded the alarm that kept it off the multi-billion-dollar American drug market. As public awareness of the thalidomide tragedy grew, the quiet scientist became a media sensation. Headlines in newspapers and magazines heralded her heroism, while a smiling President John F. Kennedy presented her an award on the White House lawn. After the thalidomide scare, Congress passed laws that expanded the FDA's authority and toughened requirements for new drug applications. Kelsey was tapped to head the agency's drug investigation branch. Working at the FDA in different capacities in Kelsey was able to witness the changes her actions helped inspire. Her visibility may have dimmed since, but her legacy endures. Privileging facts over opinions.
Well, Brian,
and
this is
patience
fun,
over
man.
shortcuts. She made evidence-based medicine the foundation of reforms that continue to protect people today. We are inspired by Frances Kelsey's story, and we hope you are too. But Dr. Kelsey's life-saving work was almost thwarted by the pervasive gender biases of the 1930s. When offered her job at the University of Chicago, she felt pressured to refuse it. Because, according to Dr. Kelsey, when a woman took a job in those days, she was made to feel as if she was depriving a man of the ability to support his wife and child. Today, women make up almost 40% of the world's paid workforce, but they are still disproportionately underrepresented in STEM fields. Why? These students in our TED Ed Clubs program are asking the same question. And many are using a platform to share their scientific ideas, discoveries, and hopes with the world. Make space for your passion and join the movement to promote student ideas. Visit ed.ted.com/hubs to learn more.
Today, plastics are everywhere. All of this plastic originated from one small object that isn't even made of plastic. For centuries, billiard balls were made of ivory from elephant tusks. But when excessive hunting caused elephant populations to decline in the 19th century, billiard balls makers began to look for alternatives, offering huge rewards. So, in 1863, an American named John Wesley Hyatt took up the challenge. Over the next 5 years, he invented a new material called celluloid, made from cellulose, a compound found in wood and straw. Hyatt soon discovered celluloid couldn't solve the billiard ball problem. The material wasn't heavy enough and didn't bounce quite right, but it could be tinted and painted to mimic more expensive materials like coral, tortoiseshell, amber, and mother of pearl. He had created what became known as the first
plastic. The word plastic can describe any material made of polymers, which are just large molecules consisting of the same repeating subunit. This includes all human-made plastics, as well as many of the materials found in living things. But in general, when people refer to plastics, they're referring to synthetic materials. The unifying feature of these is that they start out soft and malleable and can be molded into a particular shape. Despite taking the prize as the first official plastic, celluloid was highly flammable, which made production risky. So, inventors began to hunt for alternatives. In 1907, a chemist combined ethanol, a waste product of coal tar, and formaldehyde, creating a hardened new polymer called bakelite. Bakelite is much less flammable than celluloid, and the raw materials used to make it were more readily available. Bakelite was only the beginning. In the 1920s, researchers first commercially developed polystyrene, a spongy plastic used in insulation. Soon after,
Damn, that man.
chloride, or vinyl, which was flexible yet hardened. Acrylics created transparent, shatterproof panels that mimicked glass.
That's
And
pretty
in the
dead.
1930s,
Let's see if we can
nylon
get the
took
600.
center stage, a polymer designed to mimic silk, but with many times its strength. Starting in 1933, polyethylene became one of the most versatile plastics, still used today to make everything from grocery bags to shampoo bottles to bulletproof vests. New manufacturing technologies accompanied this explosion of materials. The invention of a technique called injection molding made it possible to insert melted plastics into molds of any shape where they would rapidly harden. This created possibilities for products in new varieties and shapes, and a way to inexpensively and rapidly produce plastics at scale. Scientists hoped this economical new material would make items that once had been unaffordable accessible to more people. Instead, plastics were pushed into service in World War II. During the war, plastic production in the United States quadrupled. Soldiers wore new plastic helmet liners and water-resistant vinyl raincoats. Pilots sat in cockpits made of plexiglass, a shatterproof plastic, and relied on parachutes made of resilient nylon. Afterwards, plastic manufacturing companies that had sprung up during wartime turned their attention to consumer products. Plastics began to replace other materials like wood, glass, and fabric in furniture, clothing, shoes, televisions, and radios. Versatile plastics opened up possibilities for packaging, mainly designed to keep food and other products fresh for longer. Suddenly, there were plastic garbage bags, stretchy plastic wrap, squeezable plastic bottles, takeaway cartons, and plastic containers for fruit, vegetables, and meat. Within just a few decades, this multifaceted material ushered in what became known as the plastics century. While the plastics century brought convenience and cost-effectiveness, it also created staggering environmental problems. Many plastics are made of non-renewable resources, and plastic packaging was designed to be single-use, but some plastics take centuries to decompose, creating a huge buildup of waste. This century will have to concentrate our innovations on addressing those problems by reducing plastic use, developing biodegradable plastics, and finding new ways to recycle existing plastic. So where do you come in? Visit ed.ted.com/endwaste to learn more about our global plastic waste problem and to find out how you can get involved.
Mà, cày thế nhỉ?
Deep underground lie stores of once inaccessible natural
Mà thôi đánh
gas.
cho vui vậy thôi chứ không
This
chịu.
gas was likely formed over millions of years as layers of decaying organisms were exposed to intense heat and pressure under the Earth's crust. There's a technology called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, that can extract this natural gas, potentially powering us for decades to come. So how does fracking work? And why is it a source of such heated controversy? A fracking site can be anywhere with natural gas, from a remote desert to several hundred feet from your backyard. It starts out with a long vertical hole, known as a well bore, drilled down through layers of sediment. When the well reaches 2,500 to 3,000 meters, it's at its kickoff point, where it can begin the process of horizontal drilling. It turns 90 degrees and extends horizontally for about 1.5 kilometers through a compressed black layer called the shale rock formation. A specialized perforating gun is then lowered and fired, creating a series of small inch-long holes that burst through the well's casing into the rock layer. About 3 to 4 months after the initial drilling, the well is ready for fracking to begin. Fracking fluid is pumped down into the well at a pressure so high it cracks the shale rock, creating fractures through which the trapped gas and